Today, I am excited to share with you that we are going to have an incredible group of professionals from all walks of life sharing with us. But first, let me begin on behalf of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services, our Bureau of Autism, as well as ASSERT, and the A.J. Drexel Autism Institute. Together, we have worked cooperatively to try to present to you all an indication of what we plan to do throughout Pennsylvania. It is an opportunity for us in the judicial system to learn by listening so that we can become the best that we become. Now, we have 2 hours and we have a lot of information to get into. So I don't want to take enough time, but I want to say what Anne Frank said, how wonderful it is that we need not waste a moment to start improving the world. Ours is going to be improved in the courtroom. So welcome, enjoy, and let's begin. Nina?
Good morning. Hi, everyone. My name is Nina Wall, and I serve as the Director of the Bureau of Supports for Autism and Special Populations, and that's in the Office of Developmental Programs at the Department of Human Services. So I want to welcome everyone to the first of 5 statewide regional forums that we're going to be hosting over the course of the next few months. Welcome to our launch. Special thanks to everybody who was involved in planning today's forum. Certainly my gratitude to all the panelists who are joining us today. And as you're going to hear very shortly, they bring a wealth of experience and perspective to this very, very important topic. Particular thanks, of course, to Justice Dougherty and his team for hosting this event and for his commitment to being just a terrific champion for this issue. And just a couple thoughts. You know, during my tenure in this role, along with my team, I've seen a lot of examples of negative outcomes and sad trajectories of individuals with autism spectrum disorder whose path might intersect with the justice system for a multitude of reasons. But I've also seen examples of how adverse outcomes can be avoided when the community, when the justice system and individuals and families themselves are provided with resources, support, and when they're equipped with the tools to stay safe in the community. So knowing that individuals with autism are actively engaged in community life, which is what we hope to see, what we strive for, we also need to make sure that the community and the justice system along this very, very complex continuum is an informed and a supportive partner. So it's our great hope with these regional forums that they're going to provide us with feedback about what resources and information and tools might be needed. It'll help us identify where there are gaps in the system, but also, I think this is really important, where there are models that are yielding good outcomes for people. So this gives us a great opportunity to listen and to learn. So we're taking inventory of today's discussion. We're seeking your active engagement. There's no bad question. There's no bad comment. We're just looking to facilitate a dialogue and open engagement on this topic. And we're going to be taking all this feedback, all the comments and questions back from these sessions. And we're hoping to generate some actionable steps from these forums. So welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. And I know I'm looking forward to a really vibrant and engaging session. So now I'm going to pass the mic to Kate Hooven from our ASSERT Collaborative, and she's going to be introducing a brief video clip.
Thanks, Nina. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Kate Hooven, and I'm so excited and honored to be the moderator of this phenomenal panel today. As the Justice Project Coordinator for ASSERT, a former juvenile probation officer, and the mother of a 19-year-old autistic son, I can't tell you how grateful I am for everyone's involvement in this initiative. I'd like to give a big shout out to Justice Dougherty for making this a priority in Pennsylvania's court system, as well as to our autistic self-advocate on our panel today, Alihi Kurmenas, for taking time to have her crucial voice heard on our panel. Because as all of you will come to understand by the end of this today, It is the experiences and the voices of our individuals with autism in the Commonwealth that will lead us to have a more inclusive court system, enabling access to justice for our individuals with autism. So speaking of those experiences, we're going to show a quick video here that demonstrates one person, a young boy with autism, as he's walking through a mall, and how that experience for him may look a lot different than the rest of us.
Six, 7, 8, 9. Take my hand. No, Alex. It's fine, isn't it? It's fine. I'm not naughty. I'm autistic. And I just get too much information.
Wow. Let me share with everyone. That video repeatedly, profoundly impacts me, particularly the look of the woman on the telephone, almost with disgust. And we know what she thinks. What a brat, what a bad kid. Oh my God, what kind of parent is that? In our court system, it could even be worse. One doesn't have to operate with great malice to do great harm. Just the absence of empathy and understanding, that's sufficient. Imagine an individual walking into a courtroom with someone exceedingly tall on the bench, dressed in dark, black. Imagine the majestic windows and the drapes and the words, the noises and the sounds, the rattling of handcuffs, the presence of police officers, the visuals of firearms attached to certain individuals. And when that individual, be it a child, an adult, a witness, or as I say, an employee, and they stand before us, the judges in the courts throughout Pennsylvania, without an understanding as to what they perceive, how are we to do the right thing? That's why we have to learn and we have to listen. And that's why we have you, all of you who are participating in viewing, to work with us. I often say we judges are only as good as the information as we receive. Help us. Kate?
Thank you. I would like all of our panelists to go ahead and turn your videos on now, if you would, so we can see all your smiling, happy faces, and welcome all of you here today. I would like to introduce our first panelist. Our first panelist is Alihi Kurmenas. Alihi, I'm going to let you give a little brief introduction as to your qualifications, what you're here for, why we're so grateful to have you, and then we'll dig in.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. And thank you, Justice Dougherty, for putting this together. And I really appreciate the efforts to include the voices of people with lived experience. My name is Alihi Kurmenas. I've been living with autism all my life, but I didn't know it until 4 years ago. All I knew was that I was different, and people didn't understand me, and I often didn't understand them. It led to a lot of painful situations with mental health, with substances, with getting into the behavioral health system for 10 years and being misdiagnosed. And it wasn't until 4 years ago, the person who really changed my life was a social worker. And the reason that that happened was because she listened to me and she believed me when I told her what I was going through. Instead of trying to pathologize or change who I am in order to help me succeed, she said, you know what? Have you ever thought about autism? And I said, yes, but nobody believes me. She helped me get that diagnosis that changed my life. And with a lot of support from a lot of wonderful professionals and people in and outside the system, I was able to become a certified peer specialist in mental health and then go on to work as a community autism peer specialist. And I was had the honor of serving on the steering committee for the new Autism Peer Specialist program in Philadelphia, and I now serve as a development assistant for the CAPS program at Mental Health Partnerships. My experience getting into peer support also empowered me to go back to school, and I'm now finishing my degree in Bachelor's of Science in Behavioral Health Counseling at Drexel this year. So I really, you know, although there's a lot of difficulties within the system, there's a lot of good work that can be done. And I'm really excited to be here today with everyone.
Thank you, Alihi, and thank you for sharing your personal experiences. Again, that's going to help all of us watching understand how to do our jobs better and to keep, like we said, that courtroom more inclusive. Can you give us an example? Like, what do you think justice system professionals should know about autism?
Well, I do want to start by acknowledging that, you know, I can't speak for everybody on the spectrum. I can only speak for myself, and sorry for my dogs in the background. And also, I am here with a certain amount of privilege, you know, being a white woman, and also, you know, financially, my parents were able to support me with my challenges. And I can't even, you know, begin to imagine what the experience is like for somebody who is a person of color or, you know, not a female. And I have, like everybody, been really concerned about all the harm and violence and deaths that have occurred due to the lack of understanding. So I think the best first step is what we're doing here, is trying to understand each other. And that's what I want them to know, is that we want to be heard and understood. And above all, just like any other human being, we want to feel safe. Something that, so I can really only share my own experience. And I don't have experience in the justice system, but as I said, I have experience with my own life in the system and working in it. As I said, everyone on the spectrum is unique. And so I think that it's important to talk to a wide variety of people. And also, as much as I love this, it also is difficult for a lot of us to speak under pressure. So knowing that, like, for a lot of people, just one-on-one in a quiet and safe space will probably yield the best information that you can get from that person. And obviously accommodating different needs. You know, I'm able to be pretty verbal, as you can see sometimes. And other times I might completely shut down and I won't be able to tell you what I'm feeling or thinking, especially when I'm under pressure. And when I think about interactions with authority figures, I think about, there's a lot of trauma that people experience that may not even know. Just like being in school, being parents, people often treat us as, like the kid said, like we're bad for experiencing the challenges that we do. So when I have sometimes in a situation where I feel pressured, I think all I can see is these people think I'm bad and now I don't know what to do. And a lot of people just aren't able to verbally express themselves in the best way. And I feel like in society, unfortunately, like the person who can verbally express themselves the best will come out on top. And hopefully we can make accommodations to understand people in the different ways that they communicate. And as I said, that they'll feel safe. I'd also like everyone to know that, you know, autism is not always visible. And there's a lot of masking that occurs. Like right now, I have quite a few masks on in order to just be able to talk like this. But it's really exhausting. And, you know, I feel that in society, we are always having to twist and contort and conform who we are in order to fit some sort of normative mold, really just to survive. It's not even because we want to, just to survive, just to get by. And, you know, I don't think that anyone should have to change who they are in order to be treated with dignity and respect.
I agree. And I like what you mentioned that you talk about the communication. So it's important to recognize we're sitting here, we're listening to you, and you're verbal, but you knew what was maybe going to be expected. You were able to prepare, but in a courtroom setting with a judge or an attorney asking you a question you weren't prepared for, it's important for folks to recognize maybe your language, your verbal skills wouldn't be as strong. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and you know, in my work, I've met so many people on the spectrum, and they all communicate in different ways, and I wish I could say like one answer of this is how you can better do it, and everybody's different, so I think the best thing we can do is just treat people with that dignity and respect and have patience.
Right.
Give people the benefit of the doubt and treat them with kindness. And not making assumptions. Sorry.
Right. No, that's okay. I apologize for interrupting. I was going to say, I'm sure you've heard the saying, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, right? So,
absolutely.
You know, a judge who's sitting here may have said somebody in their courtroom this month, and then 2 months later, they have another person with autism. It's important for them to recognize that that person may be very different than the person they just saw 2 months ago, correct?
Yes. Okay. I see that, you know, in my work, peer support can really help because we're able to feel each other's pains, each other's joys a little bit more deeply, even if we don't have the same experience. So really drawing upon any support sources that person has, I would say listen to them first, always. But if more information is needed, if they have other supports, and, you know, please include them.
Before we wrap up, Vicki, if you could just kind of give us an idea of like, what do you think is the priority and what should come out of this event today?
As I said, you know, everybody understanding that I think that the best thing to do is keep people safe and communicate to them that whenever we are interacting with them, that they are safe. And also that I hope that, you know, even though I can't give all the answers, that it will open up some more curiosity and desire to listen to more people on the spectrum. I kind of like, you know, the efforts that are being made in the mental health side to train through conversational, you know, efforts. So I think having more conversations would be great. I have more experience with what happens before the contact with the system. So I know that a lot of us struggle a lot with housing, with abusive situations, with unemployment and underemployment. I think all of those things really contribute. And also it's very hard to navigate the system for anybody, like the behavioral health system. So in any of these systems, so like supporting people to navigate and get the services that they need.
So they don't end up in the justice system, hopefully in the first place, correct? Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, great. Well, thank you. And I'm sure, you know, you've heard the saying, nothing about us without us, right? So, yes. so grateful for your voice today. And we'll hear from Alihi throughout the rest of the panel discussion. But thank you very much. And we're going to turn to Councilman Green now, who's going to share some words of wisdom from his experiences.
Thank you, Kate, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Justice Dougherty, for organizing this discussion. I want to thank Nina Wall, who's been a longtime advocate in the work she's done with the Bureau of Autism, the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services, Drexel University, the Assert Collaborative, all my fellow panelists, and all of the attendees who are here for this very important conversation regarding autism and the courts. I also want to give a shout out to Alihi for raising your voice as a self-advocate in my role as an at-large member of City Council. I'm a very strong supporter of the Philadelphia Autism Project, which was started by former Speaker of the House, Dennis O'Brien. And through this initiative, we've been able to partner with mental health partnerships to create the Community Autism Peer Specialist Program, or CAPS program, that Alihi spoke about. So thank you for your work and how you're helping the next generation of self-advocates. So I've been blessed to have a lot of different titles. I've often said that I wear a lot of hats, and that's why I don't have as much hair as I used to. But my most important title out of being a city council member, an attorney, is father. And so when I reflect on that video that was shown earlier, I had to really look at that video from a real personal perspective. And I shared the video with my wife, who also does a lot of work in the autism space. And we immediately, in seeing the video, took us back to when my son was 7. And if you remember in the video, it showed an escalator. And I remember a time when we took him to King of Prussia Mall, and we were going there. I think we were going to go to Disney store, and we were on the 2nd floor, and it was an escalator. And he's been on different escalators, but for some reason on this day, he did not want to go down the escalator. Maybe the steps were moving too fast, but he really had a major moment and a major breakdown. And as a parent with someone on the autism spectrum that you're caring for, you get used to the stares and people looking at you, but the real power and challenge and the sense of helplessness, not being able to help your child get through this issue. And so as he was screaming, escalator, 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 knowing that he's been on an escalator before, was trying to fight through this challenge that was stopping him from going on the escalator like he's done before, and not being able to help your child, and how powerless you feel in that moment. And so when I saw that video, it made me reflect on that issue as a parent with a child on the spectrum. And it also made me think that, when my son was diagnosed in 2003, 1 out of every 200 children were on the autism spectrum. Now the numbers show 1 out of every 68 and 1 out of every 42 children are on the autism spectrum. And so working with Philadelphia Autism Project, we really initially focused on how do we provide information about early intervention, because that was the issue. But now, as so many people are getting older, and my son just turned 20 last week, the majority of your life is not birth to 21, it's 22 until you transition. So having this conversation about autism in the courts is very important, because now young people are getting much older and they're going to have interaction with the court system. And so as an attorney—
If I could just, I'm sorry to interrupt, I just want to make a point, and you're right. Your son having that meltdown when he was 3 or 4 in an escalator is going to look very different than a 25 or 30-year-old having that meltdown, and how we react and how we respond is going to be very different as well.
Absolutely. And, especially now in the fact that he's so much older and we're dealing with issues. And I think about this as an attorney, both on the civil side and the criminal side. So now that he is 20, do we think about guardianship for my child? And in that whole idea of guardianship, are we taking away rights from him? But how are we also helping him? Because he's now at a point that he should be able to sign things on his own. Do we think about, do we do a power of attorney? And so that challenge of what's in the best interest for a child, but also are we empowering him or taking away rights from him as an individual and adult? And then on the criminal side, heaven forbid he is the victim or is observing a criminal activity. So in that perspective, from a Sixth Amendment perspective, and a defendant has a right to question a witness. And if I'm there to help him or someone's there to help interpret what he saw, is that my statement of what happened, or is that his statement of what happened? So as more and more young people are now going to be coming in contact with the court system, both from a civil perspective and how parents are trying to help their children going forward as they live their life. And if they unfortunately happen to come in contact in the criminal justice system, That's also an issue, either as a victim or a witness, or unfortunately, if they come in contact in another way, how do we deal with those issues? So these are some of the concerns I think is very important as we continue to navigate the concept of young people who are now adults in the court system and how we all deal with autism and the court system.
Thank you. And I love what you pointed out, like sort of that civil aspect too. I think a lot of times we think of, these individuals coming in as a defendant or a victim or a witness to a crime, but you're right, it is that fine line as a mom of a 19-year-old son with autism too. Like, what is he able to kind of do on his own? What is he not? So that was awesome that you pointed that out. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're now going to turn to Philadelphia Police Officer Rosalind Talley. Officer Talley and I have worked together several times. She is a fierce mama bear like me, and also a wonderful advocate for the Philadelphia Police Department. Go ahead, Ross.
Good morning, everybody. I'm so grateful to be here. First, thanks to CERT for always, including me in something so awesome. I feel so blessed to be able to be a part of this movement. And also, Justice Dougherty, this is so amazing. Thank you for your willingness to participate, and all of your coworkers or your comrades, all of the people that are your peers. I thank God for every last one of you guys, because honestly, as a mom and as a police officer, I see both sides. And together, I want to say with CERT has been absolutely amazing. They've been very instrumental in allowing me to be a part of something so big. And I think that we've been making strides and raising awareness all across the board as it relates to the criminal justice system. Although I realize that we've not arrived yet. I mean, we still have so many hurdles and so many gaps to, to bridge, and the bridges and all different types of things to bring together. I know that we're going to get there eventually. I mean, I know that the work is put ahead of us, but this is the great thing about having family members with autism, about having friends with autism. Just knowing that people should be treated fairly, should be respected, and should be understood, so that the inclusion program really is inclusion. So I thank you, Justice Dougherty, for this opportunity. I'm an instructor at the Philadelphia Police Academy, guys, and I have a 23-year-old daughter, but I also have a 3-year-old grandson who is absolutely amazing. And my daughter she has multiple disabilities, and my grandson, he was just diagnosed about a year ago with autism. So watching that video kind of touched me a little bit. I was like, oh gosh, because I can see and understand it from that perspective. I watch my grandson, I listen to a lot of the things that he does, and I see so many different things. And the difference when you say you met one with autism, you met one with autism, because my daughter and my grandson are two different people. And then as it relates to that, my goal now has been for the last 23 years, of my daughter's life, is to advocate, to make sure people, they understand what is necessary to provide a program for our kids. But more importantly, as a police officer, the criminal justice system now, I think that we're now trying to break through barriers, and some of them, honestly, I feel like they were long overdue. Having a person with special needs. I'll give you an example. I have a sergeant here who has a son who was victimized not that long ago. And he was actually being picked up by a man who was trying to lure him into the vehicle. The sad part was that, just like, Councilman Green had mentioned, when he went to testify about this situation, they actually counted it as nothing, and let the offender go. Why? Because the testimony, because he couldn't testify the way that they thought he should. And that the parents were involved. His parent is a police officer, but at the same time, he still was trying to help him talk, help him speak. Of course, the crowd, like Alihi said, can be intimidating. And also all of the other things that, people go through with autism. So he went to court to stand up his individual. And actually the case was knocked out and the guy was let go. And now he was free to be able to do whatever else he's doing out there, and luring more kids, if that's possible, whatever he's doing. And I feel awful about that. So regardless to whatever side these individuals are on, whether they're the victim or whether they're whether they are offenders, they actually should be, not overlooked for whatever, their situations are. We also had a young lady who was arrested because she was harassing a teacher by calling over and over on the phone, when I guess blocking numbers just wasn't an option for the teacher. I still don't understand that. I've still been stuck on that. Then we had another individual who had stood outside all day. Somebody had called the police to say that it was a strange man standing outside. But we also know that children or adults, people with autism, sometimes when you change up their routine, it throws them off. So this individual had been standing out all day. Police had been called to this location. The blessing was that these officers did have compassion and they were able to talk to this person. But the person, the young man that was there, he wasn't willing to talk. And that was the good thing about the officers, because they recognized something different about him. So they were able to call a lieutenant who has 2 girls with autism, and he was able to talk to this young man and actually get him to Episcopal. The sad part about that situation was that he had no ID. So as a police officer, it's a challenge when you meet people with when you meet people who have autism and who has it, and they're unable to speak, or they're afraid of the environment. And I want to say to Alihi, thank you so much for speaking up, sweetheart, because that was absolutely amazing. For you sharing yourself, for you being transparent, for you speaking up for my daughter, for you speaking up for my grandson. You spoke volumes to me. But with that being said, my goal is to work with the justices, to work with Councilman Green, to continue to work with other parents, to continue to be an advocate for people with special needs. In the academy, I actually teach and have written a curriculum for special needs, and I've included how to handle autistic individuals, how you should approach them, what you should do, what you should not do. We have little booklets. Because of a cert, I was able to sit down with them and tell them what we needed to carry in our wallets, so that when you encounter a situation like that, you can pull this little book out and you can have a conversation with those that are out there that like if you come into a house and you see these type of things, what are you looking for? The conversations that can be had and those that can't be, the things that you shouldn't say, and being able to actually, we teach the officers to give direct commands, instead of just throwing your hands up, or because them throwing their hands up, they're not going to do the same thing as another individual does. So we are very specific about that. We also have Corporal John Burke, whose son Tony is absolutely amazing. He's autistic, but he's also so funny, and he's a great actor too. So he loves giving the police officers and the police a run for their money. So we make sure that we do an extensive training. We make sure that we do a lot of different things within the department, so that our newer officers are trained and to understand what it looks like, because we know that we're part of that first process before they before they enter into the criminal justice system. We are actually the first faces that they actually encounter as it relates to the justice system.
Well, and speaking of that, Officer Tyler, we had in our chat a mother who said that her son has Asperger's and he was nearly arrested, tried to explain to the police officer he didn't understand autism, was unwilling to learn. Now, when you and I have done trainings together, we've told families, go and meet the police ahead of time before there is a critical incident. But if you have an officer who might not be willing to listen or is uneducated, is there any suggestion you have for parents or caregivers?
Absolutely. Contact the supervisor. You can call the police on the police, believe it or not. Pick up that phone, call 911, and you let them know to send their supervisor there ASAP, and have an officer, have the supervisor come out and address that particular individual. And also, I would also advise you, if you're in Philadelphia and even the surrounding counties, we have something in Philadelphia called the premise history. I'm not sure what everybody else's might be called, but this particular paperwork, you can fill it out and send it back to your local police department. And you can let them know that you have a kid living with you, or an adult living with you with autism. And then they know when they're going, it'll pop up on our screen, on our computers, and it will let us know before we get there that we are dealing with the person with autism. And I'm really I'm not happy about what I just heard, but I also would like to be able to let that individual know, if once you get this information out, you can always there's internal affairs if you don't do it right away. And then there's also a way you can contact the captain of that local district, or you can contact internal affairs, or you can contact the supervisor immediately. if that's whatever direction you want to go.
Thank you. Thanks, Officer Talley. One other quick question before we move on. If a person with autism may be afraid of a uniform, they don't understand what, all the tools and bells and whistles that you guys carry. Is there, something, do you offer that or explain to that to your officers in the training?
We do. We actually do. The funny thing is what I always suggest is that you take the time to go to the police station, kind of be proactive. Take your kid to the police station. Let them know and let them look around. Let them talk to different officers so that they can see the face of an officer that is not in a place where they're reacting to an emergent, situation. That's the first thing. But if they're unable to do so, what I would suggest to the parent is that, talk to the kid, let the police officer explain to the kid that they are safe and that they are in a good spot and that we're going to make sure that we protect them. It always depends on that situation though. If the emotion heightened at that moment, if it's an individual with a gun or situation along those lines, of course there would not be an opportune time to introduce your kid to somebody with special needs. But the officer. But on the opposite, I would say that be proactive and go and meet your captain. Let you are, and maybe do a weekly trip or maybe a monthly trip just to let them come in and just be introduced to the community relations officer. That's always a good spot to start.
Great. Thank you so much for your wealth of information. We always love having Officer Talley here. Justice Dougherty?
Hey, I am overwhelmed to hear the perspective of both parents and professionals as well as Alihi. What it does for me is it once again has a profound impact on the fact that we don't know, that I know that I don't know. And as questions come across, looking for answers, I have to share with everyone. This tour is so that we listen and that you educate us. I don't know if you're going to get the answer from us. We're looking for an answer or an understanding from you. When you have judges and the district attorney of Delaware County and city council people and heads of organizations, president judges, administrative judges, we have collected a group of people who are willing to listen. Let me best describe it as this. I was in that position of being not so much the woman with the telephone looking at the child, but one time I sat in judgment of a child, unaware that the child was on the spectrum, and I interpreted the child's behavior as incorrigible and delinquent. It wasn't until I got called to a sidebar by counsel and the mom that she shared with me the child's condition for which I was ignorant. And I'd have to believe, ignorance is not a defense in the law, and it requires learning. When we have officers or people who are not willing to learn, we have to educate them. I have to assume if you're in the public service arena, there's something within your soul that wants you to do better for others, to make our community better. We gotta just listen. Right. I know we're behind a little bit, and I just want to thank the three of you for sharing with us your stories and educating me, particularly about masks, Alihi. It's a thought I never had, but I'm not going to forget that anymore, particularly in a courtroom, as I'm sure my colleagues will. Now we can start jumping to the law enforcement aspect of this. Kate?
Yep, absolutely. With us today, we also have District Attorney Jack Stolzheimer, and he's going to share with us some of his experiences in the courtroom as well.
Sure. Thank you, Kate. And thank you all for all the panelists, and particularly to you, Justice Dougherty, for organizing this initiative. My experience with autism in the courts really began shortly after I was elected district attorney in 2019. A parent in my hometown of Havertown reached out to me because her son was in the court system as a defendant, and was due to be sentenced, and she wasn't sure that anybody really understood that he was on the spectrum. She wasn't asking for any special privileges or consideration. What she was asking for is just what we try to do for every defendant, which is tailoring a just sentence to their own particular requirements. Luckily, in this case, because my assistant district attorney had contact with this defendant before in the juvenile system, she was aware of this, and we were able to craft what we think is a great probationary sentence to hopefully give this child some more of the help they need. But as a parent of 2 teenagers myself, I struggled to understand what this poor woman was going through, she and her husband, in dealing with the child with these issues. So that became sort of interest to me, and it really became of heightened interest when I saw Justice Dougherty's initiative, which we're all now participating in today, and how this issue and this disorder is treated in the courts. And I will just say, Your Honor, I just having done a little bit of contact with people here in the Delaware County court system, I find the thing we're really behind on is in training. Only our juvenile probation department has done any training, which they described as Autism 101 from the Center of Autism in Philadelphia a few years ago. But I think we need to look at that maybe from above. But I certainly will be having that conversation, Your Honor, with our president judge, because I think everybody needs to understand these issues. I'm only learning about this as you are, Your Honor, from these conversations, and I really appreciate Councilman Green's and I'm sorry, I'm going to get the young lady's name incorrect, but the passion you have had and you have shown to us about how we need to treat this disorder and be aware of it is something that I think everybody within the entire court system needs to be aware of that and be brought home to them through training. And I think the justice would agree with me that training is the beginning of any kind of solution.
Well, and for those on the panel and those listening, just so you know, ASSERT does provide training. Our training is free, and we will tailor it to whether it is our district attorneys, our public defenders, our probation officers, our police officers. So that's something, please feel free to reach out to us if you need to. So one thing I would ask you, you did mention that this parent did reach out to you. Now here I am, I'm a mother of a 19-year-old son. He's a freshman in college. He's doing amazing, but in the college actually has autistic support. But I had said, is your local police trained? So as a parent, if something were to happen to my son, would you recommend that I reach out to you to say, is that something that you encourage parents to do? Will people listen? And who should they go to first? Should they go right to the top to you, or is there somebody else they should contact?
It's usually a mistake to try to go right to the top because I'm not the one handling the case in a courtroom. What we really need to do is have people be advocates. So if you're represented by counsel, your lawyer should be making that argument to the judge and making sure that, especially in a juvenile probationary or juvenile setting, that information should be shared throughout the system. We have much more ability to get information on defendants in the juvenile system, where all we're trying to do is give them the services they require to not be delinquent. In the adult system, in order for us to craft a just sentence, everybody in the process needs to know. Justice Dougherty will tell you the judge ultimately is the one who needs that information to make the decision, but it helps the prosecutor, it helps the defense lawyer. Parents need to be the best advocates they can be for their child. I know Councilman Green talked about guardians, that might have to be an issue in some family situations. But I think that the lack of information is probably the biggest hindrance for us to be able to properly deal with people on the spectrum in the court system.
What would you say to somebody who may have autism? Now we know they may have been bullied, teased, whatever, estranged from most people because of that diagnosis. Now here I am if I have this autism diagnosis, here I am in front of a district attorney, a judge. Should I be sharing that diagnosis? What if I'm afraid to share that diagnosis? Because what if you treat me the way other people have in the past?
Well, I will assure you that I will do my utmost to make sure that they are not mistreated in Delaware County for sharing information that we need to know. I mean, justice requires us to tailor a sentence to that individual's needs that is appropriate under the law. And I think the only way we can do that is the more information we have about that person. We don't want to be incarcerating or putting somebody in a sentence that is just not fair to them and won't help the cause. Our end goal in the criminal justice system is to have people not be repeat customers. If you are in the system, we want to give you the help, whether you have autism or you're on the spectrum or not. We want to not have you be brought back into the system. So any information you can share with us is usually helpful.
Thank you. I just want to make sure in case we did have any individuals with autism on the call that they recognized how important it is to share that diagnosis with folks. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, next up, we have Judge Ehrlich. If you would like to give us some information or some experiences you've had in the courtroom. Oh, Judge, you're muted. Can you unmute? Zoom.
All right.
There we go.
Thank you, Justice Dougherty, for inviting me and listening to people have spoken about. I was in the DA's office for 25 years. For many years, mental health cases were split among all kinds of judges, both in municipal court and common pleas court. It resulted in DAs who didn't really understand the cases, judges who didn't have the background, and also sometimes even defense counsel. We were able to, and one of my colleagues is going to speak in a few moments, Judge Sheila Wood Skipper, who was the first judge in the CP mental health court. But the first thing we did was to screen the cases. And how did we screen the cases? When the people came in through the charging unit, we put a system in place that if there were mental health issues and there was concerns about the person's mental health, those cases would go to a special judge. It was at that time President Judge Nyfield. You would get a mental health exam and 3 days later would have a hearing. And that's how we started, getting those cases concentrated in one courtroom with one judge who understood it, with special DAs and special defenders. And that subsequently led to the cases in the common pleas court, mental health court, which is more of cases that have been resolved. This was before cases were resolved. But I really think that it's about the screening, and it starts with the police, as the officer spoke about. It starts with the information that comes through 911, and it starts with the checklist. Police have a checklist, medical checklist. It includes mental health issues, but also suicide. And I'm not trying to compare autism to mental health. I'm just talking about our experience that I think can be useful to how we can better handle these cases in the criminal justice system. And there is a checklist the police have. It does not include an autism question. I did ask Ben Nash, who's a deputy commissioner, a few weeks ago about this, and he said, well, we don't ask that, but we're going to look into that. But the point is, the more information the police get, they can communicate that to the district attorney's office charging unit, which can then guide the cases appropriately. And a lot of these cases could be potentially handled through diversion or statusing or treatment or whatever it is that's necessary to try to prevent any from reoccurring. The probation department needs to understand this. Probation department probably needs to have specialized they have special units for sex offenders, mental health, for drug and alcohol, or they need to be able to have people who understand it. I think one of the probation officers I know pretty well is on this thing, Jennifer Fitzmaurice. They get it in terms of she's involved in job training. And then I think we have a chance to make the criminal justice system, like I always like to say, constructive and not destructive. And it's also about talking to the judges who may have cases in front of them that involve witnesses or others. I'm not talking about cases that have been screened for other reasons with the defendant, so that you can better understand how to talk to witnesses and deal with them. A lot of it has to do with what somebody said a few minutes ago, treating people with respect and dignity, and that applies to all defendants. It has nothing to do with people or witnesses, to listen to them and to feel that, but there are things that we should know about. And that's why what Justice Dougherty did on that Saturday morning, which was unusually well attended at the midwinter conference, to give us background so we can understand these things, so we could know them and make us better able to understand people in front of us. So I would say that the things that we can learn from our diversion courts, DUI treatment court, mental health court, other things, we can put in place with the cooperation and working with the police, court system, and also the defender's office in Philadelphia, the district attorney's office, so that we can handle these cases in a much more effective and proper way.
Right. Well, I'd like to point out two things I thought you mentioned that were really important. I know when we have done some trainings with police officers who are, those first front end people who are going to, come into contact with these individuals with autism. We did a training not long ago, and there was a couple people who actually thought autism had a physical appearance, like they should be able to look at somebody and know. So this just tells you how far we really have to go. But then another thing was that they were afraid to ask. Like they were afraid they would offend somebody if they asked them if they had autism, and then they didn't. So I think I love that you brought that up. Like you mentioned juvenile probation. As a former juvenile probation officer, I know when I walked in the courtroom that day with my juvenile that I knew all that background information, and what Judge Dougherty said, or Justice Dougherty said earlier, he doesn't know anything. You judges don't know anything unless we present that information to you, whether it's the probation officer, the family, the attorney. So all that information is going to be helpful.
I just want to follow up on what you said, also training of court staff, because they're the first people and people in the building who may be dealing with somebody or defendant, witnesses, whatever, so that they have that background. And I think if we do that, it will make things work a lot smoother. A judge can have a tremendous impact on people before them, how they treat them, bringing them back, taking an interest in them. I've seen it. This has nothing to do with autism on criminal cases for 10 years, that often nobody cared. Nobody understood them.
Right.
You can use the power to do that. It doesn't cost any money, just costs understanding and time.
Absolutely. Those sheriffs who may be the first people who come into contact with that individual with autism, whether it's through the metal detector and then having to put down a favorite item, right there you can have something start to go wrong, long before they even set foot in the courtroom. So that's a wonderful point. Thank you for pointing that out. Thank you for your time today, Judge.
My pleasure.
We're now going to move on to Judge Wall, who we've done many trainings together too, and she is a wealth of information. So thank you for being here, Judge.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Justice Dougherty, I think he's probably the only judge who has more passion about training judges on autism. Very briefly, I am a judge in Montgomery County, Court of Pleas. I've been sitting on family court for 11 years, hence the dye all over my hair. Prior to going on the bench, I joined the parent board of Meraki, which was previously known as NHS. And many of you may know that we provide autism services. So I was very fortunate getting on the bench that I understood what autism was. I started seeing custody cases where there was custody autism issues, and I recognized what they were right away. I had an incident somewhat like Justice Dougherty's. I heard one of my colleagues chastise a teen sitting in his courtroom because there was no eye contact. My first feeling was anger. And then I thought, this judge probably does not understand what autism is. And at that point, I decided we need to educate our judges and our court system. So I've been doing this since 2013. I'm going to concentrate on the custody piece of it. And one of the things that judges do is we have to make determinations on what's called the best interest of the child. We have to weigh a bunch of different factors to determine which parent is better suited. Our goal is to come up with custody that provides stability and consistency for the children. When you have an autistic child, the whole situation changes because we really have to craft our orders to what their specific needs and challenges are. What we need to do is start with an assessment. We need to know what's the child's diagnosis, what are the child's sensitivities, is the child in therapy. We need to have a bunch of background in part of our factors so that we can make sure, once again, that we're trying to determine what's in the child's best interests. Now, you would think that the best place to get that information is through the parents. That often doesn't happen. So what we do is we have to turn to some of the people who surround the child. For example, their teachers, their caretakers, other family members. We use medical providers. I've often had pediatricians testify. I think probably the greatest help to us are people who provide the therapies. And I don't know how many therapists are out on this audience, but I have to tell you, you're a godsend in family court. Now, if we need more detailed information, we'll turn to an evaluator. We'll have somebody review the records and provide us recommendations. It may be issues regarding where should the child go to school, what the best, should the child be on a special diet? Is there medication issues? So we'll often turn to resources outside of the parents, which I think is the whole basis of what we're talking about here, is we have to be educated on this child. I don't want to create a cookie cutter custody that won't work, will create all kinds of anxiety for this child. So as judges, we really need to do our homework. Now, what we often do is we have other things that we have to know. For example, and Justice Dougherty will confirm this, we need to know which parent is going to be better suited to take care of this child. Now, I know you're going to all find this very hard to believe, but we often have conflicting testimony, and we have to determine the credibility of the parent. So generally, these resources, the people who are with the child a lot, who have interaction with the parents, can provide us with a lot of useful information. Like, I want to know which parent acknowledges and supports the child's diagnosis. It's not uncommon for one of the parties to be working a lot of hours. They're not present in the household. They often will deny that the issues exist. A lot of parents don't want their child labeled, and I'm sure a lot of you understand that whole issue. We need to determine which parent has the capacity to really create a stable and safe environment. I think one of the first things that I learned is that autistic children generally have routines, they need stability, and to throw a child into a chaotic household does nothing but create so much angst for this child. So we also want to look at which parent is the team leader. And once again, I think anybody who's involved in providing services to children, there's always a parent who's doing that, who's taking the child to the therapist, who's talking to the school, who's addressing issues with the doctors. So that's one of the things that we really want to get to the bottom of in our analysis. Now, one of the issues that comes up a lot is we want to speak to the children. And as you can imagine, as we watched that poor little boy walk into the mall, you can only imagine the terror of having to walk through the courthouse and come into a courtroom that's loud and big and bright. I've interviewed hundreds of children, and here's what I normally have in my courtroom: SpongeBob SquarePants. And why do I do that? Right away, the child feels some comfort that this isn't a big bad judge. Here's a judge who has not only the SquarePants, but I also have all the little buddies that go along. So kids' faces light up. So what we want to do is we want to accommodate these children so that when they come into our courtroom, they're not feeling traumatized. So how can we do this? Generally, we can do, and we encourage sort of a pre-court prep. Either have the child walk into the courthouse, walk up the steps, go into the courthouse and see what the courtroom looks like. If that's not possible, you may want to try videos or photographs and have explain to the child who everybody is in the courthouse. That at least when the child walks in, he'll understand that judge in the big black robe or the nice sheriffs who are there to protect the judge. By giving that child a visual, it's very helpful to keep the anxiety down. Another thing that we can utilize is not pre-qualifying, but warning the judge in advance as to what could happen. As we know, some autistic children have different behaviors. For example, not being able to look you in the eye. We have children that rock and flap their hands. They may be loud and they may disrupt the courtroom. Often I have parents that'll say to me, the tone of my voice can set a child off. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the ways that people, outside resources, can tell the judge, here's what the child's issues are. Another thing that we can do is accommodating the courtroom itself. Maybe dimming the lights, closing the curtains. We may have a child who has a sensitivity to fabrics. We may have to get a different chair. We are willing to make any of the accommodations that we can in order to make these children feel comfortable. We've also been willing to take the child into another room, interview the child in a conference room or in a chambers. As I said, if I could show you my chambers, I have toys and all kinds of goodies in my chambers. So it helps the children. The child may want to come in with a favorite stuffed animal. There may have to be somebody that comes into the courtroom with the child. We need to know that. Another thing that I've noticed is you can ask a child a question, an autistic child, and they may answer you, but they may not answer you because they don't understand what you're saying. So they'll agree to something, but maybe the way it's formatted, they really don't understand. So another thing that I like is if a parent or a third party helps me to develop my questions so that the child understands what kind of information that I'm eliciting. The problem with accommodations is we can't make them unless somebody tells us.
Right. I feel like we have a theme here, don't we? You have to have that information ahead of time. Absolutely.
And I just want to go back to something that the justice said as he sat there and went through his experience of feeling horrible about not realizing the child had autism. Somebody called him over and told him what was going on. We don't always have that happening in our courtroom. I've actually had situations where I've interviewed a child and I'm seeing certain things. Now, I know you can't see autism, but certainly if you're around it enough, you start to recognize certain things. And I have parents that don't realize it. They don't realize that there may be something that they could be doing to help their child. So sometimes I've been in the position of having to gently say to the parents, has this child been diagnosed? So sometimes it's a learning experience where we can help the parents in, maybe dealing with some of the behaviors that are going on. Right. But generally speaking, I have to tell you that the takeaway for everybody here is that judges really do not know until the last minute, usually, that they have an autistic individual in the courthouse, in a courtroom. We have hundreds of cases in our inventory, and I think the judges can probably nod. And all of a sudden that day, I have a file on my desk. Judges do not know what autism is. They don't know the challenges. Right. So therefore, they probably can't craft the right outcome without having that information. We need resources to help us out.
Which is why we have these events. That I thank you very much, Judge. Let's get moving on with Judge Wood, Skipper, and Malios. We're getting crushed on time.
All right, good afternoon. Can you hear me? I'm just having some technical problems. Hello, can you hear me? Okay, I'm having some technical problems with the computer, so hopefully you can hear me this way. I'm Judge Wood Skipper. I sit as the administrative judge for the Orphans Court Division in Philadelphia. After spending about over 20 years on the criminal side, I moved over to the Orphans Court Division and have been here about 2 years. And so since Judge Ehrlich has basically covered most of what happens in terms of mental health court, which he, along with him and other team members, we created as a problem-solving court, I think I'm going to focus on something a little bit different that I don't think has been really addressed. It has been mentioned, I think, by Councilman Derek Green, and that's guardianships. Part of my role as in Orphans Court is to determine whether an individual is incapacitated and in need of a guardian. It is paramount that during these hearings that the alleged incapacitated person is able to participate because they have the absolute right to do so, and that an appropriate guardian is selected who understands the fiduciary duties and responsibilities and understands that they must act in the best interest of the incapacitated person and know and understand the needs of that person. We're seeing more cases of young adults with autism who have aged out of the system and where the parent needs the authority to act and make decisions. It is important during these hearings to make the hearing comfortable for that individual. Because we are a court of equity, I can take more liberties than probably most judges can in terms of being in a criminal setting or civil, where the rules must be strictly adhered to. So I try to make the courtroom setting much more comfortable. I also have the advantage that for guardianship hearings, a petition must be filed. So I have some advance notice of what I am dealing with, that there may be an autistic person where guardianship is being sought for. And so that prepares me in the sense that I know that I will need to talk to the parent or to the caregiver so that I can understand how that individual best communicates or understands, so that I know that he is understanding and participating in the proceeding. So that information can come from the parent, from the doctor's report, which I also receive, which gives a diagnosis and goes through all of the treatment regimens, or from any family member or anyone else who may be present in the courtroom. I also try to make my courtroom less intimidating. So for instance, now that we're all on Zoom, the hearings are virtual, I can change my virtual setting. So maybe to make it less intimidating, I take down my courtroom setting and put something more calming and more comfortable. Or maybe I have found out from one of the parents or the family members a particular object or something that the alleged incapacitated person likes, and I will try to put that up. The virtual hearings, I think, have provided for a more comfortable setting because the individual can stay in his home, surrounded by things that he or she is comfortable with and people that he is comfortable with, yet still participate in the proceeding. So that adds another layer of comfort in the ability to participate. I should also note that even if we are in person in a courtroom in a hearing, there's an ability, I will sometimes come down from the bench, take off my robe, and sit close to the AIP if I've gotten information that he's comfortable, he or she is comfortable with that. One, it makes you not appear as this powerful person sitting on top of the bench. And more importantly, I'm short. So sitting next to someone in the courtroom, that individual is not going to find intimidating in the least. I also remind individuals that these guardianship hearings that involve autistic individuals usually are individuals who have aged out, and the parent is requesting this because doctors and others want some type of authority, want the parent to have some type of legal authority to act on behalf of the individual. But I should remind you that it does not have to be a full guardianship hit. We can impose limited guardianship. There could be a supportive decision making. And one of the things that we do during the hearing is to make sure that we talk or communicate with the alleged incapacitated person to see where they are on the spectrum, to see how much they understand, to see if they have the ability to make any decisions. Do they have the competency to fill out a power of attorney or to participate in any decision making? And then decisions are made.
It's important that those people get their voice heard, right, Judge, that they are acknowledged in that courtroom, regardless of what their capability is, to make sure.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We will allow them to communicate in any way that they can. And that might mean, if they're making hand gestures and someone is interpreting, in terms of a family member. Additionally, I've had one individual who, through his parents, said, I want the judge to sing with me. And I did. He probably regretted that, but I did. The other aspect, and I know my time is running nigh, is seniors who has aged into autism, or who were never diagnosed as a young person with autism. And these, provide more complications because not only are they dealing with autism issues, they have all the medical issues or vision problems, epilepsy, cardiovascular issues, diabetes, and all of these things play into their ability to communicate and how you treat and respond to them. So what I think in terms of how we move forward at the end of the day is to recognize that autistic child who was yesterday is now our future and tomorrow's artistic adult. And we must take time and be committed to educating and training and providing resources and service so that all of these individuals can participate in our system. So I thank you, and I apologize for all the technical issues.
Amen.
Thank you, Judge, and thank you for pointing out that autism is a lifespan disorder, so important. Judge Malios, we're going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. So I'm speaking to you from the perspective of a Philadelphia family court judge. I hear protection from abuse cases, custody cases, criminal abuse cases. And one of the unique things about Philadelphia family court is 85 to 90% of our litigants are not represented. So they don't have attorneys, and we can't rely on attorneys to bring things to our attention. So like Judge Wall was saying, and as Justice Dougherty said, you have to get in there and figure out what's going on. And instead of being in a typical passive judicial role where you sit up on the bench and call balls and strikes, you may have to take that extra step to find out exactly what's going on, to ask the questions that other people don't know to ask. Asking parents for a copy of their child's or young adult's IEP. That's a wealth of information. Some people with severe autism communicate very differently. And that's why Judge Wood Skipper talked about using someone as an interpreter, also using technology to assist people in communication, language boards, and that type of thing. Limiting who can be in the courtroom, taking your robe off, taking your tie off, taking jewelry off, asking for a plainclothes sheriff because that uniform can be so distracting. I had a person with autism on the witness stand who was doing fine until someone came in through the door behind the witness stand. And that it never occurred to me that could be distracting and frightening. And just little things like just constantly asking, are you okay? Do you need a break? Is there anything I can do to make you more comfortable? Do you feel safe here? There's just so many little things that we can do. And we just, we can't leave it up to the lawyers. Even when there are lawyers, we can't assume that they know what to do. We can't assume that the parents know. I have been shocked to see cases in which a child is receiving support for autism, and one parent is in complete denial that the child is on the spectrum and is not supportive of that. And that goes to something Judge Wall was talking about in terms of a custody case. What is in the best interest of those children? Sometimes we have to educate. I've had parents who haven't even seen their child's IEP. And sometimes I just have them get a copy and give them time to look at it and bring the case back in a week or two. So these really are cases that call for us to be a little more active than we might otherwise want to be or need to be. I happen to work in Philadelphia Family Court, which is one of the finest courthouses in the country. Thank you, Justice Dougherty. We have remote video testimony rooms where we have closed circuit TV. But let's face it, in the Zoom era, any room with Wi-Fi can be a remote testimony room. And so we need to use use the technology to make it work. We have a lot of experience doing that with children who need to testify by closed circuit TV. Every courthouse has done this in criminal cases with child abuse. We could use that same technology in these types of cases. That's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge. That was great. I want to turn it over to Alihi quick, just to see if she has any comments that she would like to, ask the judges, or anything you'd like to say before we turn it over to our providers.
Okay, thank you so much. There's everything that everyone has been saying is great. The only thing that I wanted to say is that when I think about how to improve our systems, I always think of this quote from Mr. Rogers and Mr. Fred Rogers. And he said, there's a world of difference between insisting on someone's doing something and establishing an atmosphere in which that person can grow into wanting to do it. And I think that if we can keep this in mind, it'll help us. I also wanted us to recognize, institutional ableism and internalized ableism, which I think has been covered a lot with people's, comfort levels of disclosure and ability to speak. And I think that the recommendations for improving awareness and acceptance within the system is great. I'd really, in the future, also like to see this happening within the larger community. I think, that people will see people with autism and not feel like they need to call 911 or not see them as a danger or a threat, or have other options of who to call when somebody is having a difficult time.
Right, that's very important to point out. Thank you, and I hope we get there too. We're going to turn it over to Kim Ali and hear what she has to say. Go ahead, Kim.
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to participate on this panel. So thank you, Justice Dougherty, and I also like to thank Alihi. My name is Kimberly Lee. I am Commissioner for the Philadelphia Department of Human Services, responsible for child welfare as well as juvenile justice services. I do see individuals freezing, so I will turn my video off. Certainly hope that it is not a sound, not a symbol of disrespect, but want to make sure that I'm able to get through this presentation. So again, Kimberly Ali, Commissioner for the Philadelphia Department of Human Services, responsible for both child welfare as well as juvenile justice services. And I want to first say is that having a young person or having a family who is on the autism spectrum does not necessitate involvement in the child welfare system or the juvenile justice system. Parents are able and can raise their children. Again, parents are able and can raise their children. So as the Commissioner of Child Protective Services, one of the biggest priorities that we have is recognizing that early connections are critical. And that is our priority because we want to ensure connected to the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disabilities back in Philadelphia. As once you connect young people and their family services to thrive. Connections mitigate the family separations. We want to together opportunities for reunification generally support the parenting process. When we think again about another priority, our other priority, which was talked about here, is ensuring that our DHS social workers and our social workers at the providers are trained to understand the children and youth who are on the autism spectrum. That is extremely critical. We also, in terms of our priority, want to spoke a lot about this, but ensuring that children, youth, and families are engaged, that they are supported, that they are listened to, and that they are at the table to help inform some of our decisions, our policies, our practices, and our processes. Another priority around training is that we work closely with community behavioral health. So you'll hear from Laura DeRiggi, as well as from the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disabilities, who are responsible for training our staff. So both DHS as well as the community umbrella agencies. And finally, I view our priority is making sure that we are the ones, since we are the case managers, that we are communicating to the judicial. So communicating to the courts, communicate the unique needs of the children and youth that we are servicing. We want to share that information because something so concrete, letting staff that a young person who is in the room has autism, so their case can be prioritized. So they are not sitting in the waiting room, because that is difficult for them. Also, Wall talked about in terms of meeting with the client one-on-one in the chamber, making sure that the judges have the information. In terms of resources, Owen as well as Laura DeRiggi, because the resources that are provided in the child welfare system for young people and families who are on the autism spectrum are provided by both the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disabilities as well as Community Behavioral Health.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Sorry for the technology. We were hearing you, but you were cutting in and out a little bit, but I do think we got most of what you said. So thank you so much for your time. We're going to move on to Dr. Jill Bowen. Go ahead, Dr. Bowen.
Hi, good afternoon. Yes, we are. Good afternoon, all. I'm Dr. Jill Bowen, Commissioner for the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services, DBH-IDS, here in Philadelphia. I am so pleased to be amongst these incredible panelists. I have been listening intensively today and learning a lot from all of you. I want to thank Justice Dougherty and his team for putting this together, and especially for Assert for being assertive. And I just want to say a few things up front about DBH-IDS. Very pleased of the role that DBH-IDS has played in terms of working to ensure access to high quality programs grounded in best practices that are first person, family directed for those affected by ASD. Close partnership with City Council, particularly Councilman Green, in working to improve the lives of those with ASD and their families in Philadelphia, a key partner in the Philadelphia Autism Project, and continuing with Assert to move forward on many of those recommendations. Including very, very happy to hear Alihi speak. The Certified Peer Specialist Program was part of an effort that DBH-IDS had a lead role in. The CAPS program is one that has great potential to continue to grow. More than 20 have been trained and several employed in the community supporting their peers. And let's think about how helpful it would be to have CAPS in the courtroom. So in the courtroom, so DBH-IDS is embedded in the courtrooms. DBH-IDS and CBH are at family court. So they're already there and trying to make those connections, do assessments, linkages to appropriate services, autism treatment services that are specialized are available in Philadelphia. Anything from extended assessment services to specialized outpatient, embedded in the schools through the intensive behavioral health services, and applied behavioral analysis, ABA. There's more than a dozen designated providers in Philadelphia. So there's a lot of good work going on out there. But I want to shift for a moment. In my work, I'm a clinical psychologist by training, and for almost a decade, I ran a forensic psychiatry service and performed competency evaluations in New York City. And so I want to just speak for a moment about the courts and some themes. So first of all, it's really important that we be looking at the systems that we have in place, whether it's the school systems or the court systems, were not designed for people on the spectrum. They were not designed that way. And so the adjustments that we're making, which, and listening to folks today, there are tremendous efforts to make adjustments to a system that wasn't built for these individuals. But I think there needs to be an acknowledgement that it's the system that has the responsibility to shift as a system. And for many years, and part of that is stigma driven, but it falls on the responsibility of the individual or the family to make the adjustment or to push for the adjustment. Now I hear folks talking about much more collaborative effort. But I also think it's important to note, and I've heard Councilmember Green speak to this frequently, but the prevalence is striking. This is not such a rarity to, the ASD is not a rarity in our world. And so the system has tremendous responsibility to adjust. And in terms of themes, if we think of the system as a whole, just like EI, early intervention, is important on an individual level, it's also important when you think about the system. The earlier that the system can identify that someone has ASD, the easier it is to either divert or minimize or mitigate the impact of the situation. So if a person enters the court system, it's as early as possible. Does the police officer, they have awareness? Do they have training? The courts, the jails, probation. So how far upstream can we get information out, training out? Already there's training for probation officers, a training that DBH-IDS has as part of the CIT training for police. There's a lot of resources available online that PA Autism has out there. If you go to paautism.org/resources, you'll see there's quite a bit in terms of connecting to training opportunities specific for the justice system, but also in general. But as early as possible, if there's school information, the court should have it. If there's school accommodations or adjustments that are made that are specific to that individuals, the court should know what they are. And as early as possible to bring in subject matter experts. Subject matter experts are not the same as those who perhaps are utilized for doing competency evaluations, et cetera. But we're talking about autism specialists who could do a necessary assessment and provide information to the court that would be really helpful to the court, so the court makes the appropriate adjustments to serve the individual and the family.
Thank you, Dr. Bowen. I'm sorry, I have to move along. We're going to leave some time for questions and answers, but thank you so much for your time. Our last panelist is Laura Dougherty. Laura, we'll get you, go ahead and give us your information, please.
Oh, hi, I'm Laura Dougherty. I have the pleasure of being Senior Director of Clinical Consultation for Community Behavioral Health, which means I'm a director of no one. I have the lovely job of really connecting between child welfare. So I support them with my home visits and help them on the child welfare cases. Thank you, Justice Dougherty. I've known him for a long time and often have been in his court via court orders to help him on cases. And thank you, Alihi. It was wonderful to hear your story. And Officer Talley, I will be at the police academy tomorrow. My role is unique in that I am a social worker by profession. I am a transplant from Pittsburgh. I go out into the field and work with families and children and adults on the autism spectrum, but with co-occurring mental health disorders, intellectual disabilities, but sadly to also say horrible histories of sexual abuse, neglect, attachment issues. So part of my role in court, I mean, I'm in Judge Neifeld's courtroom all the time as well for the adult side, is really making sure the courts, providers understand the story. I am big on the context of people's lives, their lived experience, their family connections, the nature of their disability, regardless, whether it's on the autism spectrum, intellectual disability, and how we give information to the court. It's one thing to know a diagnosis, but it's another thing if something is not presented correctly to the courts, to the district attorney, to the public defender, in a way to help shape what the plan of care could be, what the level of understanding could be. Part of the training I do for the police academy, and I am a person of lived experience, both with a mental health challenge and a trauma history as a child and as an adult. One of the things I really train on the police officers who now have my cell phone number, which I don't mind at all, is to really talk to them about what happens to a child as well as an adult when they have a history of trauma. You overlay an intellectual disability or an autism diagnosis, you're going to confound and compound sort of the reactions that children and adults will have at the sound of a voice, lots of noise. So I love all the techniques that are implemented in court. I also do a lot of aging out transitional review meetings for children, young adults aging out of the child welfare system. What's sad for me and for our system with Commissioner and the DBH-IDS folks too is a lot of these children age out of the child welfare system, and it's only at these review meetings that somebody says, or I'll look and say, wait a minute, this young adult doesn't have life skills. This young adult seems to be on the autism spectrum, and we have to start over by getting assessments done now at age 21 that could have been done earlier on. So I bring a personal experience by going out into the field, and I think I also deal with multiple siblings on the autism spectrum who have parents with disabilities. So trying to map out for the courts, are their families safe enough to have kids be supported? And if so, what are some of the integrated services and supports that I can put into place? So I really believe in thinking out of the box. I could be really creative in making things look medically necessary, because we also work in the world of managed care and trying to look at strategies around blended braided funding to help support individuals.
Thank you, Laura. I've heard you speak many times in your wealth of information. So thank you for being part of our panel today. Justice, I'll turn it over to you before we head into some questions from the viewers.
Well, I have to share with you that once again, I'm overwhelmed by the information that I'm learning. And as a personal aside, it's obvious that I'm a blessed man to work alongside my colleagues who are so well informed and so interested in doing the things that they were elected to. When you think that we have the lead law enforcement of Delaware County who's interested in listening, and you have a family court judge in Montgomery County, and you have Philadelphia's own. I learned more from AJ Sheila Woods today than I did at any prep course in Orphans Court or Wills and Estates. But what this is really doing is that's what we do in court. But we can't do anything or improve anyone without Dr. Bowen and Commissioner Ali and my buddy Laura Dougherty. Laura Dougherty saves lives, no doubt about it. It's what she does. She did it repeatedly in my courtroom, and we didn't always agree, believe me, but we were willing to listen. Kim Ali and I worked hand in glove in courtrooms, saving children's lives. And you know what? The cream rose, and she runs the organization. This is phenomenal. What we have is, for no better term, let me describe it this way. God is good. When I see the group of people that have come together to learn, I see the questions, and we're going to get into a question and answer session, but I need to tell you all, I read these questions, and sadly, it's like what we did in family court my entire career there. There's so much good that happens within the court system, but it's only the bad that we often hear about. But you know what? Sometimes we have to listen to the bad to improve us. As I indicated, my own personal experience led to my own self-reform. You heard the story of all these professionals in their own self-reform. My hope, my goal, my prayer is that this self-reform will lead to judicial reform. So I guess let's lead off with the leaky. Is there any question for any one of us? When do you ever get a chance to speak to a councilman from Philadelphia or the commissioner of DHS or a judge? This is an opportunity for everyone to help us.
So many questions. Yeah. I was just looking at the Q&A and I saw that there were just so many questions about people being denied their rights to individual choice and their voice and self-determination regarding guardianship. And that's not my area of expertise, but, you know, I think that's so important. And, you know, if there are ways to change policies, change laws, or make it more accessible for individuals to advocate for that and give that to people, please do that. I think that is really important. I also agree with Mr. Iggy's comment about the intersection of autism and mental health. I get really frustrated, to be honest, working within the system because they're always trying to put it in a box. Is this ODP or is this, the mental health side? And I understand that it's set up that way because, out of practicality, however, it does block us a lot from providing services. So if we can better understand that, you can't really separate it. Like for me, sometimes I can, but all of these intersections, that makes up who I am and what I need. So not trying to separate what's ASD, what's the person, what's their mental health, and just saying, okay, here are the issues. What can we do to support them? Yeah, I would also like to see ways. So we're getting questions about how can I get peer support? How can I get involved? And I would say, if I would love to see more peer support. I would love to see a peer specialist accompany someone into the courtroom. Since it doesn't exist beyond Philadelphia right now, and we are trying to expand it, but maybe you all can advocate within your systems that you work for, advocate for more peer support.
Yeah, thank you. I have a quick question that seems to be repeated in many different forms, and I have to lean on the system providers. If you have an individual, be it a parent or a child that you believe could be on the spectrum, how do you approach that? And what resources do we have for that?
So I'm just going to step in and say that there are general numbers into the system to get assessments, and just a one-stop shop number to ask questions and be directed to the appropriate place to get assessed, to get supports, to get linkages is our member services number. It's a general number. We put it out there a lot. And just to know that it's 888-545-2600. So that should remove from the equation, I don't know what to do, so people are not just stuck. There is always that number to call to get started.
Thank you. That's a beginning. I know in my particular courtroom, I didn't have an idea of what was available. And working with Nina Wall and Assert, we were able to present to, as Judge Ehrlich made reference to, all the judges, at least close to 200 Pennsylvania judges, as to autism and where the resources are in each individual county. Could somebody share with us where that website is so that the public can be available? That could be available to the public?
Justice Dougherty, I think we're going to be actually, if we haven't already, posting the Assert link and the resources there. And I would really encourage everyone to take a look at the resources that have been developed that are very specifically targeted to the justice arena. Also, please let us know if there are resources perhaps that you know about that aren't reflected there. Because I mean, one of the things I really want to point out is we're becoming increasingly aware, and clearly for me, listening to all of the presenters today, the extraordinary resources we have around the Commonwealth. But I think what we need to start doing is connecting folks to resources at the local level, at the state level, and creating mechanisms for us all to engage like this. This is so important. But I believe the Assert link has been posted, and please take a look at what's there. There's some very robust information, and we welcome your feedback about what's there also.
Before we wrap it up, does anybody have a question for one of the other, whether it's panelist with panelist?
Justice, we have a great question on here. If I could get to one of our panelists, or I'm sorry, one of our viewers has asked, I have level 1 autism and am facing trial in Northampton County. What's best to share with the judge?
It's interesting that we'll be doing Lehigh Valley next in that region. But what would be best would be for the individual and or the family to share with the lawyer representing the individual, so that it should be made known to the judge and others counsel, if it's a criminal case, to the prosecutor, so that there can be accommodations made. Too often, the first person you come in contact with is a court officer who may not be exposed to autism and is more concerned with keeping everyone in line and getting the cases processed. So they may be somewhat short-tempered, which should never happen in a public service industry, but it does. People are human, but the information has to be known. And if you can't get past the court officer, the lawyer, when the case gets called, should at least have his client sit outside till it's addressed at sidebar, since it is something personal. But there are ways of getting that information to the court.
Great. Thank you,
Judges, anybody else want to throw something in?
I would just suggest that it might be appropriate to request a pretrial conference. And that would be a good time to line up any communications technology or tools, or bring in any experts, or any type of accommodations that are necessary. Sometimes you can't do it on the day of trial, and it might be better to do it that way.
Great, thank you. Another great question we have, this is for the judges, justice folks again. What would courts accept in cases where sexual misconduct is suspected, like for evaluations or assessments? What would be admissible, acceptable?
Judges, feel free. I don't want to dominate.
Well, what are we talking about? Are we talking about people who committed those or who committed against them?
It says where sexual misconduct is suspected. So I would, how about, can you address both?
Well, I think that if it's suspected, the question is what the police have investigated, but also I think it's important that the person's lawyer be in contact with the district attorney's office, because ultimately the district attorney has great discretion in how to handle cases. There's very few mandatory sentences and a lot of other things. And the more information that the district attorney's office can have, a supervisor can have, can fashion the right sentence like Jack talks about. And I think that's the best thing that can be done. As to the victim, if you're a victim, then the issue is you have victim advocates who help the district attorney's office, who ought to know about this and can help and come to court and do things to make the process work properly.
Just to add on to that, in cases of suspected child abuse, we had some success asking for a forensic interview to be done, even with an adult. Usually the forensic interviewers, their mandate and their grants only apply to them interviewing children, but asking them to make an exception for an adult on the autism spectrum could be a way to get some, to maybe break through the wall a little bit. The other thing, in terms of an alleged perpetrator, it's important to look at whether the autism affects their ability to form the intent necessary to commit a crime. Because sometimes people on the spectrum, they miss cues that other people pick up on and find themselves in trouble. I know parents who have kids on the spectrum live in fear of the criminal justice system because they're afraid that something that their child does will be misinterpreted, or their child will misinterpret something and do something maybe they shouldn't have done. All of that should be considered ideally before a charging decision is made.
Great.
From the elder person perspective, if there is suspected abuse or sexual misconduct, that can be referred to the Corporation for Aging to conduct an investigation, either of any suspect, and it could be sometimes the guardian. So that's investigated. And as a judge, we conduct review hearings, particularly on guardians, if there's any aspect of misconduct, and that can also be referred to the district attorney's office.
You were ringing there, Judge.
Yeah.
I just want to say one very quick thing. I think this all points out what we've been talking about today, of having designated courtrooms, and a designated procedure for this information to come in and to be handled by people who know what they're doing. The average district attorney doesn't understand mental health necessarily, or autism, or a lot of other things. They're prosecutors. The average defense attorney, they're trained as defense attorneys. But when you have specialized people, and most importantly, a specialized judge like Judge Woodskipper or Judge Malios who understands it, then everything can fall into place with things being done and heard properly.
Right. And Judge, that's great, because one of the next questions that leads perfectly into this, it asks a participant wonders, are there options for all counties in Pennsylvania to seek a specialized judge or a DA who can understand mental health and autism?
Well, any county can set up their court system the way they feel it's appropriate. That's the bottom line answer. In Philadelphia, I told you about how we went through years of this and finally set up things for mental health court, DUI treatment court. There's so many things you can do. It just depends on the administration of the court system in that county, but absolutely.
Kate, in Delaware County, it's been about 10 years now, we've had a mental health court. So there are specialized courts, both a drug treatment court, a mental health court, a veterans court. It's not true in every county, and especially when you get out to more rural areas where they may not have the capacity to do that. But at least in this region, we do as much as we possibly can with specialized courts.
And in the counties, there are president judges, and it would be appropriate to involve a president judge in these discussions before a case comes up.
And it's also important. I'm sorry, Justice.
Go ahead, Judge.
It also is important to be collaborative about that effort, because it's not the courts that just need to be involved, but you need the services, the resources, and all of that to set that up.
Yeah, and I would just like to throw out a question myself. Councilman Green is the chair of the Committee of the Disability and of Disabled Intellectual Disability. How can we collaborate further, or what actually does that committee do, and how does that help us?
Well, it's interesting. As we were talking, I was actually reaching out to some people from the Philadelphia Autism Project about the whole idea of bringing the CAPS program to the courts. That's something that we think could be helpful. Of course, there's some logistical challenges and also costs. And, the CAPS program is a program that we're going to be having hearings about in my committee this year to kind of educate more people about the program that Alihi has done so well in, to let other people know about this initiative. So that's one of the ways that we're using the committee, but we can do so much more. And I think having conversations like this, I think provide a lot of opportunities for collaboration between what you're doing and what we're doing in City Council going forward.
Thank you very much. That's helpful.
That's helpful.
I just wanted to say, and I thank you, Councilman Green. And it is tough that, it takes time to grow a program. There's so many logistical challenges, but in the meantime, there are family peer specialists, there are family peer navigators in many of the programs, and there are mental health peer specialists all over the place. So, in the meantime, at least rely on those resources. I also had a question of, I'm hearing all this about having a specialized approach, but I'm wondering how we can accommodate the fact that, it's such a wide spectrum, and what if it was someone like me that didn't even know that they had a diagnosis, or that it wasn't visible, or, just different ranges of abilities. And also, I guess I was thinking one solution is to take a trauma-informed care approach to the whole thing, and just assume that, someone might have gone through something. They might be having challenges that we don't know about and we can't label and put in a box.
Alihi, I just want to tell you, we're actually planning to do that kind of training with our judges in Philadelphia.
Oh, good.
With the help of Drexel and other people, because that gives you further background on who comes in your courtroom, especially with coming out of the pandemic.
And it is a systems change. It's a systems changer.
Mm-hmm.
Alihi, we have a question for you, if you don't mind, if you're able to answer this. What important things, you heard a lot of questions today, heard a lot of people talk. What important things should supporters of individuals with autism how can we help to support them in these situations to make them more tolerable, whether it's appearing in court as a victim, a witness? What would you suggest?
Are they asking how supporters can better help the autistic person?
Exactly. Yes.
Oh, I mean, it's such a big question. I don't know. I would just reiterate the.
Pictures or schedules or practice.
I mean, it just varies so much on the person's like unique challenges and abilities, and I'm hoping that somebody, at least, the person might be able to tell you, somebody would have an answer, but I would reiterate taking them into a quiet and safe place. Probably try talking one-on-one. Maybe you can have 3 people if the other person is their family or caregiver. Probably not more than that. And just try to ask them, like, do you feel comfortable? Do you feel safe? What can I do to help you? And sometimes, when I'm supporting people, just give them the space to express their frustrations. Like, I have one person who, what she does when she gets overwhelmed might be considered, somebody might see it as scary, but I just kind of sit there. I sit there in a nice way and let her get it out. And then I say, okay, do you want to put on the song from your favorite show? But just, give them that space. And I'm sorry that I can't give, even more information. It's just such a broad spectrum.
No, and I think that answer is perfect because we do all have to remember that every individual with autism is unique, and what's going to work for one person is not going to work for somebody else. So your answer was perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
And Kate, if I can follow up on that point, I think that you just mentioned that, and Alihi also said that earlier, that meeting one person on the autism spectrum means you've met one person, and it's a spectrum for a reason. I think that's so important, especially for those who are working in the court system and judges. If you're dealing with an issue of guardianship, as Judge Wood Skippers talked about earlier, for some individuals, and I would reflect that for a person on the spectrum, my first instinct would not to give guardianship to a parent, but you don't know what situation may occur with that individual. They may or may not need that. The same thing in a criminal perspective. So hopefully people have the perspective that it's a broad spectrum for a reason, and each person, just like we're all individual people, should be treated as such.
And if I can add to that just for a moment, that even within one person, from a situation to a situation, or a point in time to a point in time, there's variability. And the idea of being in the courtroom is anxiety provoking for most people, whether they're on the spectrum or not. And that acknowledgement or recognition, the first question would be, what helps you when you're anxious?
And along with that question, is somebody with autism who are they able to have an advocate, a parent, a sibling, somebody who kind of gets them, sit with them, in that situation and kind of not speak for them, but be there as a support? Is that acceptable?
That's really up to the judge in the individual courtroom. That should be requested. Unless
so they could maybe or maybe not sit at the defense table. It would depend on what that judge decides. Or
correct.
Okay.
More likely than not, they wouldn't be able to sit at the defense table. They may be able to sit right behind them. But again, it's dependent upon the judge and the case. It's a case-by-case, fact-specific scenario.
Right. Understand.
Yeah, and I would add that this goes back to having to let the judges, the judge or the judge's group know that there's an accommodation needed.
Right. Who orders a mental health or a competency evaluation? Like if you're trying to determine if this person is competent, who can order that, and how does that process work?
The judge can do it sua sponte on his own or her own, or it can be requested by counsel.
Okay. Another question is, are there resources, this might be for our providers, are there resources for individuals on the spectrum once they age out of the system? So I'm assuming they age out of the system maybe means after they're 21, assuming that.
Yes, there continue to be resources. I think Laura is speaking, but she's muted, so I didn't talk over.
Hello. Well, at least for Philadelphia, we've actually created some residential programs for young adults on the autism spectrum with co-occurring mental health I'm in the process of training some of the mobile psych rehab teams and the certified peer specialists on how to work with individuals on the autism spectrum of co-occurring mental health. I think we have a long way to go. We have some that are in our housing programs that have housing vouchers and are supported in the community, but need that extra support around life skills that doesn't fit in one system or another. It goes back to how we fund these things that wrap around these individuals. There are models on the children's side that I think we could probably try to see if we can replicate on the adult side at some point, like a mobile intensive behavioral health team. We're piloting one now for folks on the behavioral health intellectual disability sort of profile to see how that works. It really embeds a deep dialectical behavioral therapist, mobile therapist, people that really know the ID, autism, but also the trauma mental health piece integrated in one team. So it's something that we're just trying to pilot to see if that makes sense.
And Kate, if I could jump in very quickly. Yes, there are services, but the comparison between children with autism and adults, it's almost like night and day. People feel like they're falling off a cliff. So I would advocate to any parent, caregiver, or self-advocate to try to get the services as early as possible. No time is too early, just because the distinction is quite broad.
And for those individuals who might benefit from waiver services, so everybody knows in the Office of Developmental Programs with the intellectual disability autism waivers, that eligibility has expanded to include people with ASD. I think that's really important. And just one other final point I want to make, because I know we're wrapping up, but I think one thing that is so crystal clear to me too is that sometimes in all of our work to support people, we also forget about strengths, right? And here's the social worker coming out in me too. I think we can certainly see where the struggles are, and they're very real, and we need to educate ourselves about what is challenging for the individuals we care about and support, but there are great strengths there too. And a lot of the individuals we see, and you look at their histories that are very, very complex and where they have sometimes not been supported well. And you look at where they are and how resilient they are. I think we have to look at that too. And I don't want that to get lost in here, because sometimes that's your way in, when you're trying to work with somebody, is to recognize, all of those things that they use to cope and to navigate a world that can be confounding and overwhelming. So just wanted to get that out there.
That's a great point. Thank you, Nina. We'll turn it over to Justice Dougherty to wrap it up for the day.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add, Nina, since you were a partner with me from the get-go?
I'm feeling overwhelmed in a great way because of all of the great thinking and ideas. I've been taking copious notes, and I just want to thank everybody for participating today and for opening a door to, a really, really critical conversation. And Justice Dougherty, thank you again for launching this, and to everyone. Thank you.
There's no reason to thank me in particular. This is a group effort. Let me say that Pennsylvania is fortunate that we can get the likes of everyone who's been on this panel to share 2 hours of their busy day to inform all of us and educate each and every one who listens. This is just within this area. We're going to take this format and go across the Commonwealth so that we can reach each and every county, hopefully, such that urban as well as rural will all be involved. Now, we know in our regional, all our needs are the same, but sometimes our resources are limited, but available. This has to be a collaboration between counties, between our judges, between our stakeholders, and the necessary providers, so that a child in Tioga County can get the same type of resources as the child from South Philadelphia. Let me end it by saying to my friends, from the bottom of my heart, thank you all for really participating and teaching us. Alihi, I'm proud of you. You've taught me so much, as each and every one of you have done. I just hope, from a very Philadelphia perspective, that the rest of your counties, Montgomery and Delaware, with you guys, that you too can contact your Officer Tallies, your Laura DeRigis, your Commissioner Ali's, so that we can develop a system each day, every day. Our job's to help a child and ultimately help a family. As judges, we know that when a child or a person stands before us, our immediate decision will help that person. But what we must realize is that when they walk out of the door, that decision will have a ripple effect on their family. And maybe the services we provided to little Kevin Dougherty will have an effect on all his family members. We often know that many siblings have autism. More so, I want to make the clarion call that those on the spectrum transcend race, gender, color, religion. We need to know that. What bothers me is that I think the statistics, Councilman, correct me if I'm wrong, 1 in 68 children are diagnosed with autism. Yet the majority of us don't even know where autistic resources are available. Many of our kids in Philadelphia and throughout Pennsylvania are poor. Imagine what the real number is if we were to get the resources to our most at-risk and vulnerable people. That's what my mission is. That's what collectively we're going to do. And I can't tell you, couldn't do it without you. But let me give finally a special shout out to Speaker Dennis O'Brien, whose energy for autism education has ignited this project. So thank you, each and every one of you. And until we meet again, stay safe. Bye now.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.